Marcus Johnson sat at his kitchen table, sipping his morning coffee before heading to work. At 34, he had established a steady routine, up at 5:30 a.m., coffee by 6 o'clock, and at the construction site by 7 o'clock. The April sun was just beginning to brighten his small apartment when a sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Opening the door, Marcus found a courier holding out an envelope. "Marcus Johnson, please sign here." The man's businesslike tone gave nothing away about the contents. Marcus scribbled his signature and closed the door, turning the official-looking envelope over in his hands. His heart sank when he saw the county courthouse stamp. Legal papers never brought good news. Inside was a summons for a paternity hearing. According to the documents, a woman named Tanya Wilson claimed Marcus was the father of her 7-year-old daughter Zoe. The court date was set for 2 weeks from today. "This has to be a mistake," Marcus muttered, reading the papers again. The name Tanya Wilson sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He certainly hadn't been involved with anyone who had a child he didn't know about. That night, after a long day at the construction site, Marcus called his sister Letitia. "A paternity test? For whose child?" Letitia asked, her voice rising in surprise. "Some woman named Tanya Wilson. Says I'm the father of her 7-year-old daughter," Marcus replied, flipping through the papers again. "The name sounds familiar, but I can't remember who she is." "Tanya Wilson," Letitia repeated slowly. "Wait, wasn't she that girl who used to come to those community center events years ago? Tall, always wore her hair in braids." A fuzzy image formed in Marcus's mind, a woman with a bright smile who he chatted with at neighborhood gatherings. Maybe, but we were never together like that. I barely knew her. "Well, the test will clear it up," Letitia said practically, "but you need a lawyer, Marcus." The next day, Marcus took time off work to visit a legal aid office. The attorney, a young woman named Ms. Bennett, reviewed his case. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you'd think," she explained. "The court will order a DNA test, and if you're not the father, the case will be dismissed." "But I need to work," Marcus protested. "I can't keep taking days off for court appearances." Ms. Bennett nodded sympathetically. "I understand. We'll try to expedite things, but the system moves at its own pace." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus could barely sleep. His work suffered as he worried about the upcoming hearing. His foreman noticed his distraction. "Everything okay, Johnson?" he asked one afternoon when Marcus had nearly dropped a beam. "Just some legal trouble," Marcus said vaguely. "Nothing I did wrong, but it's stressing me out." When the court date finally arrived, Marcus dressed in his best clothes, dark slacks and a button-down shirt he usually saved for church. The courthouse was intimidating, with its marble floors and high ceilings. He followed the signs to courtroom 4B, his hands trembling slightly. Sitting on a hard bench outside the courtroom, Marcus spotted a woman walking toward him, holding the hand of a small girl. His breath caught as he recognized Tanya Wilson, older than he remembered, but definitely the same woman. And beside her was a little girl with bright eyes and colorful beads in her hair. Zoe. Their eyes met, and Tanya's expression hardened. She quickly guided her daughter to a bench on the far side of the hallway, whispering something in the child's ear. All parties in Wilson versus Johnson, called the court officer, opening the heavy wooden doors. Marcus took a deep breath and stood up. It was time to face whatever was coming. Marcus entered courtroom 4B with unsteady legs. The room was smaller than he expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly overhead. He followed his lawyer to a table on the right side of the room, while Tanya and her attorney took the left. Judge Patricia Walters, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, looked down from her bench. "Wilson versus Johnson, paternity case," she announced, reviewing the file before her. "Your Honor, we're here today because Ms. Wilson claims Mr. Johnson is the biological father of her 7-year-old daughter, Zoe," Tanya's lawyer stated. "My client is seeking child support payments and legal acknowledgement of paternity." Marcus listened in disbelief as the lawyer continued. When it was his turn to speak, Ms. Bennett stated firmly, "Your Honor, my client denies being the father of this child. We're requesting a DNA test to resolve this matter." Judge Walters nodded. "Ms. Wilson, can you explain your claim that Mr. Johnson is the father of your child?" Tanya stood, smoothing her skirt. Yes, Your Honor. I met Marcus at community events back in 2017. We became close, and our relationship became intimate in October of that year. When I discovered I was pregnant in December, I tried to contact him, but he had changed jobs and moved. I had no way to reach him. Marcus's jaw tightened. This was completely false. He and Tanya had never been more than casual acquaintances. I raised Zoe on my own all these years, Tanya continued, her voice trembling slightly. But recently, I saw Marcus at the grocery store and knew it was time for him to take responsibility. Judge Walters turned to Marcus. Mr. Johnson, your response. Marcus stood, feeling all eyes on him. Your Honor, I remember Ms. Wilson from community events, but we were never in a relationship. We never spent time alone together, and we certainly never had intimate relations. This is the first I'm hearing about having a child. The judge frowned. Ms. Wilson, do you have any evidence of your relationship with Mr. Johnson? Tanya's lawyer stepped forward. Your Honor, we have photos showing Mr. Johnson and Ms. Wilson together at several events during the relevant time period. He presented several photographs showing Marcus and Tanya at community gatherings. In one, they stood next to each other at a barbecue. In another, they were part of a group cleaning up a local park. These just show we were at the same events, Marcus protested. There were dozens of other people there too. Tanya spoke up again, her voice stronger now. Marcus, how can you deny this? Remember the night after the Halloween event when we walked home together? And the time you helped me move furniture into my apartment, you stayed for dinner. Marcus felt cold sweat forming on his brow. He did vaguely recall helping Tanya with a couch once, along with 2 other guys from the neighborhood. But he never stayed for dinner, and they certainly never walked home together after Halloween. Your Honor, these are fabrications, Ms. Bennett stated. The photos prove nothing more than my client's statement that they were acquaintances who attended the same community events. Judge Walters studied both parties carefully. Clearly, there are conflicting accounts here. A DNA test is the only way to resolve this matter definitively. We welcome a DNA test, Your Honor, Tanya's lawyer said confidently. Marcus nodded in agreement, relieved that science would clear his name. The court orders a paternity test to be conducted at Metropolitan Medical Center within 7 days, Judge Walters declared. We'll reconvene when the results are available. As they left the courtroom, Marcus caught Tanya giving him a strange look, not anger or sadness, but something closer to calculation. Little Zoe glanced back at him with curious eyes, and for a moment, Marcus felt an unexpected pang. This child believed he was her father, but he was a complete stranger to her. Outside, Ms. Bennett patted his shoulder. Don't worry, the test will settle this quickly. But as Marcus walked to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about this case. Why would Tanya make these claims now, after all these years? 3 days after the court hearing, Marcus sat nervously in the waiting room at Metropolitan Medical Center. The paternity testing area was tucked away on the 3rd floor, a small, clinical space with uncomfortable plastic chairs and outdated magazines. A television mounted in the corner played a daytime talk show with the volume turned low. Johnson called a lab technician, a young woman in blue scrubs. We're ready for you. Marcus followed her through a door into a small examination room. The procedure was simpler than he expected, just a quick swab inside his cheek to collect DNA. It took less than 2 minutes. That's it? Marcus asked. The technician nodded. That's it. The mother and child were already tested yesterday. Results should be ready within 5 to 7 business days. As Marcus left the medical center, his phone rang. It was his boss, Frank. Johnson, where the hell are you? We got the foundation poured today, and we're short-handed. Sorry, I had that legal thing. I'm on my way now, Marcus said, hurrying to his car. Look, I like you, but this is the 3rd time this month. Whatever's going on, get it sorted. Marcus arrived at the construction site 30 minutes later, changed quickly, and jumped into work. But his mind kept drifting back to the courtroom, to Tanya's accusations, and to the little girl's curious eyes. Even though he knew he wasn't Zoe's father, the situation weighed on him. That evening, exhausted from work, Marcus called his sister again. Did the testing go okay? Letitia asked. Yeah, just a cheek swab. Now we wait, Marcus replied, opening his nearly empty refrigerator. He hadn't had time for grocery shopping in days. "I still can't believe Tanya would make this up," Letitia said. "Remember when she used to volunteer at the community garden? She seemed so honest." "People change," Marcus said, settling for a peanut butter sandwich for dinner. "Or maybe I never really knew her." The next week crawled by. Marcus threw himself into his work, trying to get back in his boss's good graces. But at night, sleep eluded him. He found himself searching through old photos on his phone, looking for any that might include Tanya from those community events years ago. On Thursday evening, while Marcus was fixing his leaky kitchen faucet, his phone rang. It was Ms. Bennett. "The results are in," she said. "The court has scheduled a hearing for Monday at 9 a.m. to review them." "Do you know what they say?" Marcus asked, his wrench slipping from his damp hand. "No, they're sealed until the hearing. But try not to worry. DNA doesn't lie." The weekend was the longest of Marcus's life. He cleaned his apartment obsessively, went for long runs, and even visited church on Sunday for the first time in months, seeking some kind of peace. Sunday night, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I hope you're ready for tomorrow. Zoe deserves the truth. Tanya." Marcus stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Finally, he turned off his phone and tried to sleep. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. Marcus dressed carefully in the same clothes he'd worn to the first hearing, adding a tie his father had given him years ago. It was the most important day of his life, though he couldn't explain why. He knew the test would clear him, yet something about the case had gotten under his skin. As he drove to the courthouse, Marcus rehearsed how he would react when the judge announced he wasn't the father. He should feel relief, vindication. But instead, he felt a strange heaviness, as if the case had awakened something long forgotten. He parked his car and walked up the courthouse steps, where Ms. Bennett was waiting. "Ready?" she asked. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was ready at all for what would happen next. Courtroom 4B was more crowded than during the first hearing. Marcus noticed several court staff lingering near the back wall, as if they had heard something interesting was about to happen. Judge Walters entered, and everyone rose. "Be seated," she said, sorting through papers on her bench. "We're here for Wilson versus Johnson, paternity case." Marcus sat rigidly beside Ms. Bennett. Across the aisle, Tanya looked calm and collected in a neat blue dress. Zoe wasn't present today. They had agreed to keep her out of the courtroom until paternity was established. "I have before me the results of the DNA test conducted at Metropolitan Medical Center," Judge Walters announced, holding up a sealed envelope. "These results will determine whether Mr. Johnson is the biological father of Zoe Wilson." The judge opened the envelope carefully and read the contents. Her expression remained neutral as she reviewed the document. The courtroom was so quiet that Marcus could hear the ticking of the wall clock. "The test results are conclusive," Judge Walters stated. She looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, the DNA analysis indicates that you are not the biological father of Zoe Wilson." A wave of relief washed over Marcus. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling the breath he'd been holding. Ms. Bennett squeezed his arm gently. "Given these results," the judge continued, "Ms. Wilson's petition for child support and legal recognition of paternity is denied." Tanya showed no reaction to the news. No surprise, no disappointment, nothing. This struck Marcus as odd. Shouldn't she be upset that her claim had been disproven? "Your Honor," Tanya's lawyer spoke up, "while we accept the biological findings, we would like to request." "No," Judge Walters interrupted. "The sole purpose of this hearing was to determine biological paternity. That question has been answered definitively. If Ms. Wilson wishes to pursue other matters, she must file a separate petition." The judge began gathering her papers, clearly considering the matter closed. "This case is dismissed." Ms. Bennett turned to Marcus with a smile. "That's it. You're free to go." But something didn't feel right to Marcus. The calm expression on Tanya's face, the way she hadn't reacted to the news. It all seemed strange, almost as if she had expected this outcome. "Your Honor," Marcus said suddenly, standing up. "May I speak?" Ms. Bennett tugged at his sleeve. "Marcus, what are you doing? We won." Judge Walters looked surprised. "Mr. Johnson, the case has been dismissed in your favor. You have no obligation to make any statement." I understand, Your Honor, but I need to say something. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Very well, proceed. Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding. Your Honor, the test results are correct. I am not Zoe's biological father. He paused, gathering his courage for what he needed to say next. But there's something important that hasn't been mentioned in this courtroom. Tanya was watching him intently now, her composed facade beginning to crack. Your Honor, Marcus continued, his voice growing steadier, DNA doesn't tell the whole story here. Judge Walters leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. What do you mean, Mr. Johnson? Marcus took a deep breath. I may not be Zoe's biological father, but I've been her dad in every way that matters since she was 2 years old. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Judge Walters's face drained of color as the implications of Marcus's statement sank in. What exactly are you saying, Mr. Johnson? The judge asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that Tanya and I were never romantically involved, that's true. But 5 years ago, I came into Zoe's life as a father figure. Tanya and I had an agreement. I've been helping raise her daughter all this time. Tanya stood up abruptly. Marcus, don't. Your Honor, Marcus continued, ignoring Tanya's interruption. There's a much bigger story here than what the DNA test shows. Judge Walters's expression was a mixture of confusion and concern. She looked from Marcus to Tanya and back again, trying to make sense of this unexpected turn. This court will take a 15-minute recess, she announced, banging her gavel. When we return, Mr. Johnson, I want to hear exactly what you mean. As the judge left the bench, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Miss Bennett was staring at Marcus in disbelief. What are you doing? She hissed. We won the case. But Marcus kept his eyes on Tanya, who was now conferring urgently with her lawyer. This was never about winning, he said quietly. It's about doing what's right for Zoe. During the 15-minute recess, the small waiting area outside courtroom 4B became a battleground of whispered arguments. Miss Bennett pulled Marcus to a quiet corner, her professional composure barely hiding her frustration. Marcus, what are you doing? She demanded. You just won the case. Why are you opening this up again? Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of 5 years of secrets. Because winning isn't what matters here, there's a little girl involved. Across the hallway, Tanya was having an equally intense conversation with her attorney, occasionally glancing in Marcus's direction with a mixture of anger and fear. When the bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Judge Walters returned to the bench, her expression grave. Mr. Johnson, she began, you made a rather startling statement before our recess. You claimed that while you are not the biological father of Zoe Wilson, you have been acting as her father since she was 2 years old. Is that correct? Marcus stood, feeling every eye in the room on him. Yes, Your Honor. Please explain exactly what you mean by that. Marcus took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I was volunteering at the East Side Community Center, teaching kids basic carpentry on Saturdays. Zoe was in my class. She was just 2, really too young for the program, but Tanya was struggling to find childcare. He glanced at Tanya, whose face had gone completely still. Over a few weeks, I noticed Zoe would come in with the same clothes, sometimes not very clean. One day, Tanya broke down and told me she was working 2 jobs and barely making ends meet. The courtroom was silent as Marcus continued. I started helping out, watching Zoe some evenings, bringing groceries, fixing things in their apartment. Eventually, Tanya and I made an arrangement. I would help support Zoe and be a father figure to her, but we would keep our relationship strictly about co-parenting. Judge Walters frowned. And yet Ms. Wilson filed this paternity suit claiming you were the biological father. Yes, Marcus said, shifting uncomfortably. Our arrangement worked well for years. I was at Zoe's birthday parties, school events, doctor appointments. I paid for her after-school programs, bought her clothes, helped her with homework. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photo. This is from Zoe's 5th birthday. I built her a dollhouse. She called me Daddy Marcus from that day on. The judge accepted the photo, studying it carefully before looking up. If this arrangement was working, Mr. Johnson, what changed? Why are we here today? Marcus looked directly at Tanya. 3 months ago, I lost my job when the construction company downsized. I couldn't provide the same financial support temporarily. Tanya said if I wasn't contributing money, I couldn't see Zoe anymore. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. That's not true. Tanya suddenly burst out, Your Honor, he's twisting everything. Ms. Wilson, you will have your chance to speak, Judge Walters said firmly. Mr. Johnson, please continue. I was desperate to stay in Zoe's life, Marcus explained. I've been the only father she's known. When Tanya filed this paternity suit, I was confused at first. But then I realized she knew I wasn't the biological father. She was counting on the test to prove that, so she could permanently cut me out of Zoe's life. Tanya shot to her feet. He has no legal rights to my daughter. He's not her father. But I am her dad, Marcus said softly. Maybe not by blood, but in all the ways that matter. Judge Walters held up her hand for silence. Ms. Wilson, is what Mr. Johnson saying accurate? Has he been acting as a father figure to your daughter for the past 5 years? Tanya's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she pushed him away. He was just helping out, that's all. We never had any formal agreement. Your Honor, Marcus said, I have evidence. Years of receipts for Zoe's expenses, school forms where I'm listed as an emergency contact, cards from Zoe signed I love you, Daddy Marcus. I even have text messages from Tanya thanking me for being such a good father to Zoe. Judge Walters removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. The simple paternity case had suddenly transformed into something much more complex. A question of what truly makes someone a parent. This changes everything, she said quietly, her face still pale with the implications of what she was hearing. The courtroom remained silent as Marcus reached down for his weathered brown leather messenger bag. With steady hands, he pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Zoe in neat handwriting. Your Honor, may I approach the bench? Marcus asked. Judge Walters nodded, still visibly processing the unexpected turn of events. Yes, Mr. Johnson, you may. Marcus walked forward, feeling the weight of every step. He placed the folder before the judge and returned to his place at the table. Inside that folder is 5 years of my life with Zoe, he explained. Everything that shows I've been her father in every way except biology. Judge Walters opened the folder and began examining its contents. The first item was a school registration form from Cherry Hill Elementary with Marcus listed as father/guardian and his signature at the bottom. Ms. Wilson, the judge said, holding up the document, this school form has Mr. Johnson listed as a parent. Did you authorize this? Tanya shifted uncomfortably. The school required 2 emergency contacts. It was just easier to put him down. The judge continued through the papers, pulling out a stack of receipts held together with a paperclip. Clothing purchases, doctor visit copays, after-school program tuition, all paid by Mr. Johnson. Next came a series of photographs. Marcus pushing Zoe on a swing, the 2 of them baking cookies with flour smudged on their faces, Zoe sitting on Marcus's shoulders at what appeared to be a parade, and Marcus helping her ride a bicycle. Your Honor, Tanya's lawyer interjected. While these items show Mr. Johnson had a relationship with the child, they don't establish any legal right to parental status. Ms. Bennett spoke up. Your Honor, there's legal precedent for de facto parenthood in cases where a non-biological adult has played a consistent parental role with the consent of the legal parent. Judge Walters nodded. I'm familiar with those cases, Counselor. She continued examining the contents of the folder, posing at a stack of colorful homemade cards. She selected one with a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures, a tall one and a small one, holding hands. Inside, in a child's uneven handwriting, it read, Happy birthday, Daddy Marcus. I love you more than ice cream. Love, Zoe. The judge looked up at Tanya. Ms. Wilson, these cards clearly show your daughter considered Mr. Johnson to be her father. Tanya's composure finally cracked. He was good to her, I won't deny that, but things changed. He started talking about wanting more official rights, about having her stay with him on weekends. She's my daughter. Marcus shook his head. I only asked for that after you threatened to keep her from me when I couldn't pay for a few months. The judge held up her hand. Mr. Johnson, do you have any documentation of your financial arrangement with Ms. Wilson? Yes, Your Honor. Marcus pointed to a section of the folder. There are bank statements showing regular transfers to Tanya's account labeled Zoe Support going back 5 years. There are also text messages where we discussed expenses for Zoe. Judge Walters found the bank statements and skimmed through them, then examined a printed page of text messages. Her eyebrows raised as she read one from Tanya to Marcus. "Thanks for always being the dad Zoe deserves. Don't know what we'd do without you." The message was dated just 6 months earlier. "Ms. Wilson," the judge said, looking up, "this doesn't align with your testimony. It appears you actively encouraged Mr. Johnson to serve as a father figure to your daughter." "It wasn't like that," Tanya insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Judge Walters pulled out one final document from the folder, a birthday card from Zoe to Marcus from just 2 months ago. Inside was a photograph of Marcus and Zoe fishing by a lake, both beaming at the camera. The card read, "To the best dad ever. Thanks for teaching me to fish and helping with my math homework. Love forever, your Zoe." "Your Honor," Marcus said quietly, "I've been there for every important moment in Zoe's life since she was 2. First day of school, lost teeth, scraped knees, nightmares. I'm the one who taught her to ride a bike and swim. I helped her through her fear of thunderstorms. I've been her dad in every way that matters." Judge Walters closed the folder, her expression solemn. The evidence before her painted a clear picture of a man who had devoted himself to a child who wasn't biologically his, and of a complicated situation that went far beyond the simple paternity test results. Judge Walters called for another brief recess. She needed time to review the evidence and consider the complex legal questions before her. As she left the courtroom, the tension between Marcus and Tanya became almost unbearable. "Why are you doing this?" Tanya hissed across the aisle. "We both knew you weren't Zoe's real father." Marcus looked at her steadily. "That's where you're wrong, Tanya. Being a real father isn't about biology. It's about showing up, day after day, year after year." Ms. Bennett pulled Marcus aside. "The judge has a difficult decision to make. There's no simple precedent for this exact situation. In family court, the best interest of the child is paramount, but parental rights are also strongly protected." "I just want to stay in Zoe's life," Marcus said. "She shouldn't lose a father because of adult disagreements." When Judge Walters returned 20 minutes later, the courtroom fell immediately silent. She took her seat and adjusted her glasses, surveying the parties before her. "This case has taken an unexpected turn," she began. "What began as a straightforward paternity suit has evolved into a much more complex question of parental rights and the nature of family." She folded her hands on the bench. "Mr. Johnson has presented substantial evidence that he has functioned as Zoe Wilson's father for approximately 5 years, with Ms. Wilson's knowledge and apparent consent. While he is not the biological father, a fact he freely acknowledges, he has clearly established himself as what the law sometimes recognizes as a psychological parent or de facto parent." Tanya's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, regardless of Mr. Johnson's involvement, Ms. Wilson has never formally agreed to share parental rights. As Zoe's biological mother and sole legal parent, she retains the right to determine who can have a relationship with her child." Judge Walters nodded. "That's the traditional legal view, counselor. However, family law has evolved to recognize that children form important attachments that may deserve protection, even when they fall outside traditional legal frameworks." She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, what exactly are you seeking here?" Marcus stood, his voice steady. "I'm not trying to take Zoe away from her mother. I'm not asking for primary custody. I just want to remain in her life, to continue being her dad. I want legal recognition of the relationship we already have." "And Ms. Wilson," the judge continued, "why are you opposed to Mr. Johnson maintaining a relationship with your daughter, given the evidence that she views him as her father?" Tanya hesitated, glancing at her lawyer. "I appreciate what Marcus has done for Zoe, but at the end of the day, I'm her mother. I should have the final say in who gets to be in her life permanently." Judge Walters removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "This court is faced with a fundamental question. Can a non-biological adult who has functionally served as a parent, with the knowledge and implied consent of the legal parent, establish rights to maintain that relationship when the legal parent later objects?" The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers and shifting in seats had stopped as everyone waited for the judge to continue. "Different states have approached this question differently," Judge Walters explained. "Some recognize psychological parent or de facto parent status, while others strictly adhere to biological or legal ties. She looked directly at Zoe's photo on her bench, but at the center of this case is a 7-year-old girl who has known Mr. Johnson as her father for most of her life. The sudden removal of such a figure could potentially cause significant emotional harm. Judge Walters turned to Ms. Bennett. Counselor, are you prepared to file a petition for third-party visitation or de facto parent status on behalf of your client? Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Bennett replied. We can submit that immediately. And Ms. Wilson, the judge continued, are you willing to consider mediation to find a solution that respects her role as Zoe's mother while acknowledging the relationship she has with Mr. Johnson? Tanya looked uncertain. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she slowly nodded. Before making any final determinations, Judge Walters said, I believe we need to understand more about Zoe's perspective and best interests. I'm appointing a guardian ad litem to represent her interests in this matter. The judge's face remained solemn as she considered the profound question before her court. Who has the right to be called a parent? 2 weeks passed before the final hearing in the case of Wilson versus Johnson. During this time, Susan Reeves, the court-appointed guardian ad litem, met several times with Zoe, Marcus, and Tanya. She observed Zoe's interactions with both adults and carefully documented the child's thoughts and feelings. On a bright Tuesday morning, Marcus arrived at the courthouse early. He sat on a bench outside courtroom 4B, nervously straightening his tie. This was the day that would determine his future relationship with the little girl he loved as his own. Tanya arrived a few minutes later, looking tired but composed. She nodded briefly to Marcus, but sat at the opposite end of the bench. Neither spoke. The tension between them had evolved from anger to a wary uncertainty. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the bailiff called them into the courtroom. Judge Walters entered, and everyone stood. Today, for the first time, Zoe was present. Be seated, Judge Walters said. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that today's proceedings will focus entirely on what is best for Zoe Wilson. The adult's preferences and conflicts are secondary to her well-being. The judge turned to Ms. Reeves. As guardian ad litem, please share your findings with the court. Ms. Reeves stood, a folder in her hands. Your Honor, after spending significant time with Zoe and observing her interactions with both Ms. Wilson and Mr. Johnson, I've reached several conclusions. She opened her folder. First, Zoe has a strong, healthy attachment to her mother, who has consistently provided for her physical and emotional needs. Tanya smiled slightly, relief visible on her face. Second, Ms. Reeves continued, Zoe also has a deep, meaningful bond with Mr. Johnson. In our sessions, she consistently referred to him as Daddy Marcus and shared numerous positive memories of their time together. Marcus blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. When asked about her family, Zoe drew a picture of 3 people, herself, her mother, and Mr. Johnson. When I asked if she missed seeing Mr. Johnson regularly, she became visibly upset and asked when he would be coming back to read her bedtime stories. Ms. Reeves looked directly at the judge. In my professional opinion, suddenly removing Mr. Johnson from Zoe's life would cause significant emotional harm. She views him as her father and doesn't understand why he hasn't been around lately. Judge Walters nodded. Thank you, Ms. Reeves. She turned to address both parties. I've reviewed all the evidence, considered Ms. Reeves' recommendations, and researched the relevant legal precedents. I'm now ready to issue my ruling. The courtroom fell silent. Marcus held his breath. This court finds that while Mr. Johnson is not Zoe Wilson's biological father, he has functioned as her psychological parent for approximately 5 years, with Ms. Wilson's implicit consent. The evidence clearly shows that Ms. Wilson encouraged and facilitated this relationship until their recent disagreement. Judge Walters continued, family courts exist primarily to protect children's interests. While parents have significant rights, those rights must sometimes be balanced against a child's need for stability and emotional well-being. She looked directly at Tanya. Ms. Wilson, you remain Zoe's legal mother with primary custody and decision-making authority. Tanya sighed with relief. However, the judge continued, this court also recognizes Mr. Johnson as a de facto parent with limited legal rights. Marcus's hands trembled as he gripped the table. I am ordering a visitation schedule that allows Mr. Johnson to maintain his relationship with Zoe. You'll have visitation every other weekend and one evening per week. Both parties will attend co-parenting counseling to learn how to work together for Zoe's benefit. Judge Walters looked between them. This arrangement recognizes both Ms. Wilson's role as primary parent and Mr. Johnson's established place in Zoe's life. She leaned forward. While this may not be what either of you initially wanted, I urge you both to consider Zoe's perspective. She loves you both. She needs you both. The judge glanced at Zoe, who was watching with wide, curious eyes. Sometimes families don't look the way we expect them to, but that doesn't make them any less real or important. Judge Walters closed her folder. Court is adjourned. As people began to rise, Zoe broke away from Ms. Reeves and ran forward. "Daddy Marcus," she called, rushing toward him. Marcus knelt down and opened his arms as Zoe crashed into them, hugging him tightly. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too, sweetheart," Marcus replied, his voice breaking. "But I'm not going anywhere now, I promise." Tanya watched them, her expression softening slightly. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, there was also hope. Hope that they could find a way forward that put Zoe's happiness first.